I need to repair this Xbox single-handed controller. I thought it might be fun to talk about some stories from the past. Gamestop is in the news a lot these days, obviously. But I thought I would maybe talk about Funcoland. I'm sure some of you remember Funcoland. Funcoland was kind of a regional used game store back in like the 90s. Of course, like all things, they got swallowed up by GameStop as time went on, but they were really cool back in the day. I hate to say this because Microsoft is always really good to me, but one of the major failing points with these controllers, it is analog stick related. I actually want to talk about that in an upcoming video. I want to try to make a better analog stick because I know it'll get the clicks. So I need to examine that. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Oh no, I coughed. Someone's gonna be upset. Now, I tested the analog stick. It's definitely messed up. I don't know if it's the stick's fault or the wiring. We'll find out. They do sell replacement analog sticks on Amazon, but they're usually terrible. You can't rely on them. So I usually scavenge parts from old controllers. Actually, Microsoft sent me a whole box of like questionable Xbox One controllers a couple years ago. They're like, oh yeah, here's all our spare controllers from our test labs. So that was nice of them. So I've always got spare parts. Did I glue that on? Anyway, Funcoland. So I first became familiar with Funcoland from like magazine ads because, you know, when I was like a teenager, I would buy like, what was it, EGM? Electronic Gaming Monthly? And they would have ads. They'd be like 1 or 2 page ads in the back, and it'd be from Funcoland. And it would be a list of all the games, and they would, I believe they would list the trade-in value and the price, right? So you could actually trade in by mail. Did they put, I wouldn't have put super glue on this. See this white? Well, God help me, I'm gonna taste it. That looks like super glue outgassing residue. So the customer may have tried to modify this. Oh well, I'm gonna fix it anyway. See, this is why I don't super glue things like this, so I can take them apart. So anyway, yeah, I actually did like some mail-in trades. I can't remember what the game was, but it would be like, okay, if you mail in this game and you want this game, you owe the balance, the difference, plus shipping. And yeah, it worked. So I grew up in the country, so, you know, sometimes you would mail away for stuff. I guess it's kind of funny how it's all kind of come back full circle. Anyway, so a couple years later, there was a Funcoland, and I would go there all the time. And remember, the owner's name was, or the manager's name was Phil. He's a pretty cool dude. He's probably in his late 30s at the time. And eventually he's like, well, me and my friend, he's like, hey, you guys want a job here? And we're like, yeah, cool. My friend, I think my friend got like keys because he was a year older and he was also really tall. He was like 6'6". And it's one of those things, it's like one of those like unspoken rules, like tall people make more. Well, don't, it's not, it's statistically true. Tall people make more money. Well, he was also more mature than I was at the time, even notwithstanding the age difference. So that would have been like 1995. And I worked there for the holiday season, and I gotta say, it was a really fun job. So I thought I'd tell you some of the stories, and because there's some. Let's see, there's PlayStation guys, James Pond, the aquatic games. What else? Oh, Bubble Bobble and all the trades. So for starters, this is back in 1995. I think minimum wage was like $4.25 back then. And that was back when, well, I don't want to get into a political debate, but working for minimum wage didn't have quite the stigma it does now. But the thing that was cool about Funcoland is we were selling those, there were cleaning kits for the systems, but of course the Nintendo one was the easiest to sell. So there was system cleaning kits and also magazine subscriptions. I want to say it was Game Pro. Maybe someone could correct me. And I think the cleaning kit was like $14 and the game or the magazine subscription was $15. And of course, you know, they had sales goals like they all do. Like, you know, Best Buy tells you they don't work on commission. They do. If they don't meet their goals, they get their hours cut. That's just how it is. It's like cops who say they don't have a quota at the end of the month. They do. Anyway, the thing was, every time we sold a cleaning kit or a magazine subscription, $2.50 was added onto our check. Just simple as that, right? So in the holiday season, it was very easy to make like $12, $14, $15 an hour in 1995 as a 19-year-old. All you had to do was sell, sell, sell. And it was so easy because obviously Nintendo was, 2 generations behind at that time because PlayStation had just come out. But people were still buying a lot of Nintendo games. And all you had to, it was just so simple. You just had to say, does your Nintendo blink? Oh, yes, it does blink. Buy this kit. Cha-ching! It was so easy. So I didn't really care about the magazines as much because as long as you were selling the stuff, they were happy, and it was a lot easier to sell the cleaning kits. I mean, we had cleaning kits for other consoles. So what, Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis? You know, as we know now, the Nintendo blinking issue had more to do with the security chip than the connector itself. Although, when you do have 2 separate buses, a connector that does increase your chance of error. It was a good paying job. And there is a perk, like when you hear about like new games that have been opened, we could actually open a new game, borrow it for like a week, bring it back, put it back in the box and still sell it as new. And I distinctly remember the game we did that with was EA Sports PGA Tour 96. Because no way we were going to spend $70. And yes, it was $70. That's why I always talk about inflation in game prices, because these people on YouTube clearly didn't, you know, they're clearly little babies back in the 90s, or not even born. They had no idea what some games cost. Like Star Fox, Street Fighter 2. So anyway, yeah, we would borrow PGA Tour 96, and we played it quite a bit. I always enjoy golf games. Of course, then, that was before I knew the wonders of Neo Turf Masters on the Neo Geo. I'm going to test the existing stick like this just to make sure it wasn't some sort of short circuit or anything. So I guess the first story I could tell would be about the PlayStation 1. So obviously the PlayStation 1 had just come out at that time. Because it was, you know, it was the Christmas season. Wait, now it appears to be working. What the heck? That's weird. Maybe they fouled it up with their little hot glue experiment. Or their super glue experiment. Oh, that's weird. I plugged the controller back in and now the analog stick appears to be behaving normally. And selfishly I say, oh, that's good because I don't have to use up one of my precious good analog sticks to replace it. I think I'll just rewire it and check it. So yeah, PlayStation buyer. So this is 1995. PlayStation 1 had just come out. And these guys, of course it was always guys, you know, they would buy the PlayStation 1. And it was funny, they would come in like every week, the same guys, and they would trade 2 PlayStation 1 games to get 1 new one. So they are basically always losing money. And they were trading them quite rapidly. And of course there was only like 10 games total back then. But the thing that was funny was like every single one of them, the first thing they asked was, where's Madden 96? They all wanted Madden 96. Because remember, this is 1995, so it's going to be 1 year ahead. They all wanted Madden 96 for the PlayStation 1. And then my friend was like, oh man, you know what? I hope that game gets delayed an entire year just to make these guys mad. And that is what happened. Many years later, we find out that apparently the development of Madden 96 on PlayStation was a disaster. It was taking like over a minute between plays to load data. So obviously that wouldn't have been acceptable. But it was just kind of funny that they would always come in. And the other thing that was kind of funny was that all of the PlayStation buyers were like exactly the same. It was always like a white dude. I don't know, probably like 24, 25. For some reason, they all wore starter jackets. I don't know why. So white dude, you know, mid-20s, starter jacket, and usually had like kind of a frumpy-looking girlfriend, like someone you'd see on like Dr. Phil or something. Kind of rednecky. Seriously, it was to the point where they'd open the door and we knew exactly. We knew, yes, they were going to come in, they were going to trade in 2 PlayStation 1 games for 1 new one and ask about Madden 96. And it was so funny because it was so consistent. It was, well, I guess, yeah, we were profiling them. We were like, oh, that person looks like a PlayStation 1 buyer, and we were almost always right. I know that sounds awful, but hey, you know what? When you work in a store, you know, you just tend to notice things. Kind of on the same, no, not exactly the same note, but there's this thing we had to do. So again, this is in the mid-90s, so a lot of people were still using checks, right? Well, I still use checks for like my large bills. Anything over 300 usually, which is basically just taxes and health insurance now. But so people would come in and they'd spend like $400 on like a PlayStation 1 and a couple games. But the thing that was lame was that any check over $300 we had to call Equifax, which is one of the 3 credit unions. Equifax, TransUnion, what's the other one? Experian. So it was so dumb. So we would call Equifax, and we had to sit there. We had to give them like the name, the check number, their driver's license number. So I guess basically we were running a mini credit report on them. Which, thinking back now, I wonder if that actually counted as an inquiry on their credit report. I never thought about that until just now, because back then I had no idea how any of that stuff worked. Almost every time they were approved to, you know, use a check for a large item like that. But sometimes they weren't, and we had to say, oh, this has been declined. And they would come back, you know, with cash or something. Was that actually counting as a hard inquiry, as they're called? Like if you log into like TransUnion, right, and you check your credit score, that's a soft inquiry, right? That doesn't count against your score. But if I go to 3 different car lots, seeing who'll give me the best loan, and if they all run my credit, that could actually be like 3 different hard inquiries, which, you know, you could probably lose 20 points on something like that. That was kind of inconvenient. And I know there were times when I had someone with like, oh, they bought 2 cleaning kits and a Game Pro subscription. So I'm thinking, oh man, that's like a pizza right there, right? But then we do the Equifax and it's denied. And I'm like, oh great, I don't get that sale. It wasn't like, oh, I lost, you know, $12 in tips, so to speak. It's like I spent 30 minutes with this customer, and that's 30 minutes less of selling people easy to sell Nintendo cleaning kits. False alarm. The joystick is still buggy. I'm going to have to replace it. On the same note with the checks and Equifax, or whoever it was, I think it was Equifax. Any check that a customer wrote, we had to put information on it. What we would do is we would, I guess I could illustrate this. So for any check, on the upper left corner of the check, we had to draw like a cross like this. And it was like date of birth, so like 7/12/70, driver's license number, blah, 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 phone number, blah, blah, blah. And then I think if it was over 300, this is where like the Equifax approval number went. So the thing that was funny about that was if it was like a young woman, she writes a check and then you have to ask for her phone number. And a lot of the time they're like, what? Why do you want my phone number? And it's like, well, it's not because you're cute. It's because of the store policy on checks. So sometimes that was kind of awkward. I did notice women love Bubble Bobble. Like anytime like a young woman, and by that I mean like, you know, 20s. Because, you know, obviously they weren't teenagers buying games. Anytime a young woman would come in asking for games, it was always, where's Bubble Bobble? They all wanted Bubble Bobble. And if we did have a Bubble Bobble in stock, it would be gone in like an hour. It was so popular. I don't know why. There's this running gag with the manager where he would always increase the amount of time that the cleaning kit would expand the life of your console. So first it went from like 1 year to 10 years. And then I think by the time I left, it was up to about 1,000 years. So that was always kind of a running joke. You know, it'll work for 1,000 years. And I guess I still make that joke with my friends. You know, it's like, oh, I replaced this power supply on my MakerBot. It'll run for 1,000 years now. We also had a lot of people who tried to bring in Atari 2600 stuff. And we weren't allowed, obviously we couldn't trade it in. But then also we couldn't buy it from them. So they did discourage, you know, like, oh, go out in the parking lot and buy it. Although nowadays, as, you know, a 45-year-old man, I would just say screw it, and I would do that anyway because I don't care. But, you know, when you're young, you know, you respect authority more, strangely enough. Because you're like, oh, I don't want to lose my lucrative minimum wage job. You know, I think I might have actually done that once. Like, we could only give someone, like, $1 for Sonic Tube, and then I think I actually did. Like, slip them a $5 on the way out the door. Oh, who cares? Funcoland is gone now. What are they going to do? Come after me? Well, sorry, this one's going to go in the trash. Yeah, it's like I'm scavenging these analog sticks off of old controllers, but there's only a finite amount. Yeah, these are made by Alps. I know videos have been made about it, but yeah, it's basically a spring-loaded two-way joystick with 2 potentiometers on it. I had my way. I would change how this works. Like the click switch, it requires a decent amount of force. So the thing is, people don't realize how strong our hands are. I mean, that's probably like a good, like, 10 pounds of force. I mean, why couldn't it be smoother and, like, just use an opto interrupter to see if, you know, the stick is moved? Again, maybe I'll do that in my video. You know, you can still go online and you can Google images of the Funko sheets. So we'd have these, like, single page sheets, which was the price list, right? And you can actually go on Google and, like, download them from the 90s. And then you can look up how, like, Little Samson was $6 and cry. Oh yeah, even like stadium events. Yeah, you can Google it. Google like one of those sheets, and it's not worth anything. Or it wasn't worth anything back then. Kind of funny how that changes. I think the 3DO also came out around that time, so we actually really enjoyed playing Gex, because you know he was a pop culture spouting lizard, and of course we were all big Mystery Science Theater fans. So all right, so there's the laser cut piece that acts as the base for the analog. I hope I don't give away too many of my trade secrets here. I know people have asked me for the 3D files for this, and I'm like, no, I actually build a lot of these and make a lot of money on it, so that's my money. It is I, Captain Capitalism, with my equity and my money bags. Making lots of money is good for you. All right, so Funcoland. There was this running, not gag, but there was this game. Okay, I'm sure some of you probably remember James Pond, the EA James Bond fish character from the 90s. So there was James Pond, and then there was RoboCod, where he became a robot. And then there's another one, which was James Pond and the Aquatic Games, right? And we had a new copy of that, I think for Genesis, and nobody wanted it. It just sat on the shelf. So we had this competition where whoever could sell it first would get, like, I don't know, lunch or something, which I'm sure was like Taco Bell. So this guy comes in, right? And, you know, see, I think in some alternate universe, I'm probably a really good lawyer or a sleazy car salesman. So his dad comes in with his kid, and I'm like, this is my mark. You know, mark comes from carnies would find a sucker and make a chalk mark on their back. So the mark didn't see the mark, but the other, what do they call it? Carnies would see the mark. I'm like, oh, there's a sucker. Come over here and toss a ring. So I decided this guy was my mark. Maybe his name was Mark. I don't know. And I'm like, I'm going to sell this guy that game. Because it had sat, and it was also like, it was new price, which I think was like $45 for that title. And yeah, it had been there. It had been there pretty much the entire time I've been there. And I'm like, oh, this is such a great, this is a great game for kids. That's what everyone always asks, what's a great game for kids? And then we'd always say, oh, we always wanted to say, oh, a great game for kids? Hell, a cyberpunk thriller for 3DO. I'm like, it's a great game for kids. It's going to be a good father-son bonding. I spent about 30 minutes, but I finally got him to buy it, and I won the bet. I was so proud of myself, although I also felt kind of scummy because I'm sure the game was crap. I looked at it as a exercise in persuasion. Oh, I don't know why I remember this, but for whatever reason, I still remember the smell of the window washing fluid. It wasn't Windex, it was something different. But it had like this really unique smell, and I really liked how it smelled, because we would have to clean like the display glass and stuff. It's one of those things like if I could buy an air freshener that was Funcoland brand, not Windex window washing fluid, I would buy it because it would be like a nostalgic smell for me. I know that probably sounds kind of silly. Oh, there's this kid who called at least once a week. He didn't come in, he always just called. The only thing he would ever ask is, hey, do you have, Real Monsters game in yet? And we had no idea what it was because we were adults. We didn't watch Nickelodeon. And we're like, no, there is no game called, Real Monsters. Then many millennia later, I was at a game convention. I saw a cartridge for it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's that game that kid was always asking about. Oh, I did remember what was that game? What's like that cult game on Nintendo, like Monster Party? Yeah, we actually found a copy of that at Funcoland, and we actually played it a lot because it was kind of like just so funny and kind of stupid. And it's now like a cult classic, so I guess we were ahead of the curve. Yeah, you hear all these horror stories about GameStop, but Funcoland back in the day was a really cool place to work. Oh, Funcoland was also the first place that I ever saw those biodegradable cornstarch peanuts. I guess packing peanuts are kind of out of vogue now, but I'm sure you've seen those. I would sometimes take home entire bags of those things and then like eat them because, it's really no worse than like a cheese ball. It just doesn't have cheese on the outside of it. It's just a cornstarch puff, really. I have two different size apertures for these joysticks. This is like the larger one, although sometimes another thing with these joysticks that's different than last generation, if you go all the way to one edge, it sticks there. See, in the previous generation, by that I mean Xbox 360, the analog sticks were physically larger and they actually wouldn't get stuck in any direction like this. So the thing that actually prevents them from getting stuck is limitations on the PCB. Like the edge of this will actually hit a PCB or a piece of plastic before you get to that extremity. So sometimes that's a problem. Like if we have a wide open cap like this one, it might be a little too, well, it looks like this one doesn't have a problem, but I still might replace it. It might be too open here, which means the stick can go far enough to get stuck like I just showed you. I'm trying to think what else happened. Okay, so I covered the window washing fluid, the PlayStation guys. We had a Virtual Boy there too, yeah. So because that had also come out that year, so yeah, we had it on the end of the display table, or the end of the. No, it was on the end of the transaction table. So yeah, sometimes we'd play it, and it was like, this kind of sucks, and nobody bought it. Man, I remember that thing was being blown out at KB Toys like not even a year after it was released for like $25. Sayonara, Robocod! He's a fish killer. Well, the controller's repaired, and I can't think of any more stories to tell you about Funcoland. Just to say that for a brief period in time, it was a really cool place to work. And I will always remember and cherish my days at the land of fun, Funcoland. Did you know that the Road Warrior and Titanic both have the same final line of dialogue? He exists now only in my memory.